Ay, 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 it has been a rough month, and I was starting to worry that I wasn't going to get this video out in time, but here we are, I made it, and with such serendipitous timing too, thanks to all these delays. It was just in time to coincide with Activision having that live stream where they said they were going to reveal the
My announcement is we're not announcing anything during the stream. We are playing Crash Bandicoot, as we said.
Excuse me, they were going to reveal their fingers aren't exactly on the pulse when it comes to marketing. Well, there's 3 hours of my life I'm never gonna get back. Yay! That joke isn't going to seem wildly out of date when this video gets released to the public. No, not at all. Hello, everyone. I am Tessellating Hexagons, and I really thought that this month, March, even though most people won't see this anywhere close to when I release it, and if you want my references to be a bit more timely, then consider supporting me on Patreon for as little as $1 per video so you can see these videos sooner. As I was saying, that this month would be the perfect time to do some sort of video about the beloved PlayStation mascot Spyro the Dragon. What with the inevitable announcement of an HD remaster of the original 3 games coming out of the woodwork very soon. Or, at least, that's how people feel right now at the moment anyway. People are sure that that's a thing that's going to exist, it's just that Activision have yet to actually acknowledge that it's a thing that exists. And so I was so ready to celebrate that announcement by discussing the qualities of the original game and what made it so great, with a view to eventually moving on to discussing the other 2 games in the original trilogy in future Patreon videos. Now I'm just here talking about the original game for no reason other than because it's a good game and I like it. Wait, that's actually a totally valid reason in itself, huh? Well then. Alright. Well, as always, let's kick things off with the fast facts about the game. Spyro the Dragon, named after a portmanteau of the Latin and ancient Greek words Spiro and Pyro, meaning I breathe and fire, respectively, brilliant name for a dragon, is a mascot-themed, level-based 3D Collectathon platformer developed by Insomniac Games and published by Sony Computer Entertainment. Now, the rights have sort of shifted around between companies since then, but that was the original game, and that's what I'm talking about. Because of its popularity in the West, it would go on to be a fully fledged franchise that persists to this day, albeit in a grossly butchered format, having deviated substantially from the original idea. The original game was released for the original PlayStation and was subsequently re-released on the PlayStation Network store for PS3 and PS4 owners to download at their leisure, and supposedly an HD remaster is in the works for either just the PS4 or the PS4, Nintendo Switch, and PC, and maybe more, depending on whether or not it follows the same pattern as the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy. I'm getting off topic just a little. It was originally released in North America on the 9th of September 1998, and came to Europe almost 2 months later, on the 23rd of October. Come on, people, get your act together, it doesn't take that long to localize a game. Next up was the Australian release on the 15th of November, 1998. Come on, people, get your act together, it doesn't take that long to localize a game. And finally, a considerable amount of time later, on the 1st of April, 1999, it was brought to Japan. And what a fitting date to do so, given how much of a joke the Japanese version of the game is. But the less said about that slow, janky, awkward camera-ass version of the game, the better. Before anything else, let's focus on the basic game idea that persisted for 4, but we don't count Enter the Dragonfly in this household, or at least 6 if you count that and both of the poorly optimized GBA titles that preceded the twist on the formula brought on by Spyro Adventure. Okay, so they've used this formula a lot, so let's unpack it. Broadly, the way each game works is this. You're presented with several hub worlds, typically following a theme, whether that's the job class of the dragons that live there, or seasons of the year, times of day, astral bodies, or seasons of the year again. In each hub world, there are portals, magical archways, stylized in various ways or not, that lead to actual levels with actual danger in them, as opposed to the mostly non-threatening playground that is each hub. Across the game, the objective is to collect several large, significant collectibles to open the way to later parts of the game, whilst supplementing that with a collection of smaller, more frequent collectibles which, much like Mario's coins and Sonic's rings, serve as currency. But unlike those, they only exist in finite numbers and function solely as additional collectibles to overcome progress barriers. I'm speaking deliberately vaguely here, just because, on paper, it's standard Collectathon fare. Get all 200 to 300 gems, or however many there are, all the good games have them in units of round hundreds, in every level, while you're looking for the more important collectibles, whether those are orbs, dragon eggs, frozen fairies, fireflies, or in this case, crystallized dragons, so that your almighty MacGuffin inventory is swollen and impressive enough to convince the powers that be that you're worthy to enter the next level. Now, I'll grant you, on paper, it does seem like a really basic, really silly, and almost childishly unrealistic premise for a game, but given the way that it persisted for so long, and given that it still has a very active fanbase to this day, it clearly works to whatever degree. My theory on that is, it's just regular fun that doesn't take itself too seriously, which is where some of the later games went horribly wrong. Get away from me. It's just satisfying fun to collect stuff off the back of skill-based challenges. It doesn't need a reason. Let's narrow our focus to just the first 3 games though for a hot second. I'll throw up both hands and outright refuse to pick a favourite for one simple reason. All 3 of them are the best, but at different things. They're all fun, and they're all satisfying, but they're all slightly different experiences from one another based on the same formula, which, for a mascot-centric Collectathon trilogy from the late 90s, early 2000s, is very impressive. The third game is the biggest, featuring the most recurring characters and the most diverse gameplay. The second is a good bridge between what the first game defines as the raw Spyro experience and the smorgasbord of gameplay styles of the third game, with a heavier focus on characters and story, both locally to each level and across the entire game as a whole. And the first game, as I said, defined exactly what a base level Spyro game should look like without any additional fluff. So let's dive deeper still and look at what made the first game such a solid, great foundation to build an entire franchise on top of. Well, let's start with something basic, something simple, something fringe, something that you barely notice because of how well it's done, because you know me by now. Y'all should know that I start with the simpler points just so that I can build up to something more heavy-hitting later in the video, but before we get to the heavy and more obvious stuff, let's give due attention to the general presentation of the game overall. In my script, I titled this section The Art Direction, but that's not all of it, really. The sound design needs fair acknowledgement too, as does the control scheme, which wouldn't really fit anywhere else in this review. Just generally speaking, Spyro is a pretty game that sounds great and makes excellent use of the PlayStation's entire, very specific set of skills. So let's start at the beginning. As soon as you boot the game up, you get logos from the developers, and then we're straight into a sample environment that really sets the tone for the game's visual style. A Nork, obvious from its design that it's one of the enemies of the game, places a sign bearing the Insomniac logo, and then Spyro flies in, defeating the enemy and landing on the title screen, immediately and wordlessly introducing the tone of the world, 2 elements of the game, that is the presence of combat and of flying segments, and Spyro's personality. That, underscored by a playful but not childish composition, he doesn't take shit from anyone, and that he's quite happy to be the hero. After that, we get the first cutscene, which, when I Let's Played the game, I went to the trouble of subtitling. Actually, I subtitled the entire game. You're welcome. Anyway, this opening cutscene quickly establishes a few key elements: the laws by which Spyro's world operates, the objective of the game, the motive of the villain, and, most importantly, the game's sense of humour and self-image. Nasty Nork's motives are deliberately weak because they're just a means to an end. A dragon ambassador calls him ugly just to add insult to the injury of him being exiled. He's a 2-bit Saturday morning cartoon villain at best, and knowing that is what underscores the entire basis of the game, making it obvious that it's just meant to be wholesome, fantastic, escapist fun. Also, credit to the writers for slipping in a nod in that first cutscene to what your gem total should look like in a 100% save file, both before and after the bonus level, without making it obvious that that's what's being referred to, unless you have that inside knowledge going into it. And from there, we're drag-and-dropped straight into the first homeworld. In all fairness, Spyro 1 has the most dangerous homeworlds of any of the 5 Spyro games I've discussed, not counting the Forbidden One. In all other games, if you're able to jump off an edge, you'll be brought back to safety with no penalty, apart from in Spyro 2, they hadn't figured that out at that point, that maybe dying in the hub world wasn't the greatest design decision. And, in all other games, there were no stage hazards that could do any damage to you, since fall damage and drowning literally do not exist in the Spyro universe, apart from the latter in the first game, because Spyro couldn't swim and then he could. But in Spyro 1, there are enemies, death pits, water hazards, and, well, actually I think that's it, but still, hazards in the homeworlds which serve to train the player in a relatively lenient environment about how the game works, giving you the opportunity to acclimatize to the controls, which, to me at least, feel incredibly natural and logical. And so, with those controls and that introduction, you're free to get every gem and every dragon in the Artisan's homeworld before even going into a single level if you want to, but you don't have to. and that level of freedom and relative non-linearity becomes a key theme that recurs throughout not just the game but the franchise as a whole, until it turned. As you free dragons, especially in the early game, they'll give little tips on how to play better or offer small amounts of world-building lore and such like, and then, later on, they run out of ideas and just have the dragons spout, "Thank you for releasing me," ad nauseam, even going so far as to give comically frail voices to the dragons with macho-sounding names, because Insomniac humour. But that's a positive. Every step closer to 100% that you take gives you some sort of immediate reward, whether that's advice or immersion or just instant gratification that you've saved another dragon. On top of that, each dragon's pedestal acts as a checkpoint and a save point should you want to quit the game. And so, by the end of the first hub world, you've experienced pretty much everything that you'd need to in order to be ready, hungry even, for what the rest of the game has to offer. Each homeworld ups the ante in terms of what sort of skill level is expected from you, but it trains you up in such a way that you're never out of your depth at any point. Occasionally more mechanics are added, such as egg thieves for an added collectible, or locked chests that you need to find a key in order to open, or supercharge ramps where you go faster and you have more power but less control, but the difficulty never spikes beyond reason. And visually, it never gets boring as well. Each of the game's hub worlds follows a different theme. You start in the plain old Green Hill Zone kind of trope, but from there, you find a canyon tar pit thing with old-timey soldier-themed enemies, a mountain retreat full of wizards and whimsical magic, a dark swamp in the middle of being forcibly futurized where there are electric hazards and such like, on top of the already dangerous natural environment, and a castle courtyard in the sky themed around dreams, and that's saying nothing of the endgame. They're all visually distinct, and they're all visually gorgeous. Two further points that help with that are, within each hub world, the levels follow the homeworld's theme, but no two levels feel the same. In the Canyon world, for instance, you've got Dry Canyon as a starting point, but then there's the much more open-plan Cliff Town, and the network of frozen caves in Ice Cavern. It never looks repetitive, and while the themes unify each level, they never feel like a rehash of one another. The other thing that keeps each area distinct is the music. The entire game's soundtrack was actually composed by Stuart Copeland, the drummer from The Police, a rock band, not like the actual Police. He gave Spyro's music its very distinct style, and every level had its own distinct sound. Once again, while each one matched the overall feel of its hub world, and the game as a whole for that matter, no two tracks sounded identical, even if there was the occasional shared motif, but you know, whatever. And I could go on about the aesthetic of the game for a good while yet, praising the simple but not simplistic visuals and its revolutionary approach to rendering mip-maps at varying levels of detail depending on the distance between the texture and the camera, but I think I've made this video a bit top-heavy with that stuff as it is, and that's even without going into the technical side. The bottom line is that the visuals are great, artistically and technically. The music is great, the controls are great, and the progression is great. Now let's grab that last point firmly and inspect it more closely still, and take a look at the level design on a raw level, ignoring any superficial aspects about it. I've gushed already about the general cleverness of how each level feels like a distinct area that fits cogently with its colleagues without ever feeling repetitive, and how the whole game teaches you how to be progressively better without expressly holding your hand. But let's go another layer deeper and look at the levels and their designs on an individual basis. In my personal estimation, I'd say that every level strikes a balance that's within the general correct range between linearity and open-worldery. It's fairly obvious where you're expected to go and where you're allowed to choose your own path, but it never feels like you're on rails. For your very first time in the level, just follow the gems if you get lost, and for subsequent visits, once you've collected most of the gems, the level geometry is still fairly straightforward without feeling like it's limiting or like it's boxing you in. The general pattern in each level, with some exceptions of course, is that you spawn in at the start, travel the long way around and reach the goal, and from that goal, there's usually a quick and easy shortcut that takes you back to the start or to another point in the level. Sometimes getting to the goal activates a whirlwind or something that can be used to get back to the goal quickly if you, for example, jump down to the start again, but of course those despawn if you leave the level and then come back. There are levels that deviate from this though, which is completely fine. For instance, in the third homeworld, there's a level by the name of High Caves, where the start of the level immediately presents the player with a fork in the path. One of these routes is a quick shortcut through some caves which are home to giant invincible and, to a young player, potentially terrifying spider monsters, while the other route is more circuitous, lengthy, and features platforming challenges meant to test your abilities thus far and then some, and so the choice falls to the player. Play it safe and take the challenge of the road less travelled, or go for the shortcut and risk being spidered to death. Both routes lead to the same place, and at that destination, you're given access to the means required to defeat the spider enemies and make the caves safe to travel through. It's just up to you how you go about getting to that. Come to think of it, the very first main level of the game, Stone Hill, does something very similar. You start off in a walled-in plaza kind of place, and if you go into one specific room, you end up at the end of the level immediately. But there's no penalty for going into the, quote, wrong rooms. That's where all the other collectibles are located for that level, so this teaches the player that exploration is always an option, and almost always an option that leads to rewards at that, at the expense of keeping you in the level for that little bit longer. But since the game doesn't track how long you're in each level, that's something of a non-issue unless you're really impatient or that desperate to see what else the game has to offer. Still though, by having the first level's goal so close at hand at all times, it really does make it feel like exploring the level is 100% your own personal choice, and that anything you find is your reward for making that investment and looking around the level. It goes on to set you up for levels where it's not as gentle as that, and I think that's beautiful. And because the game is so built around exploration, you'll never reach a point of no return in any given level. If it looks like you can't go back from somewhere, that just means that the return path is somewhere up ahead instead. By that same token, if you're wandering around and you see an area with gems but no apparent way of getting there, that's meant to encourage you to keep looking until you find a way. Wizard Peak is the best example of that, featuring several large enemies on high, seemingly inaccessible platforms, tormenting you for the first chunk of the stage, and you might think that there's no way to reach them, nor any reason, were it not for the gems lying next to them, just tantalizingly out of reach. But before I go too far off the deep end praising that, I need to remember to stop thinking like a game designing academic for a hot second here. Yes, the design ethos works on a technical level, complementing the controls and gameplay style, and subtly and non-invasively guiding the player without overtly telling them all the answers through the game and teaching them how to play and how to improve their skills, but there's something else in there too. It's just downright satisfying, like I said before. Some levels will taunt you with shots of places that you can't get to, but that you just know you must be able to get to somehow because there are collectibles up there. And if the way there isn't immediately apparent by the time you get to the end of the level, it's made that much more satisfying when you do finally figure it out, whether that's finding the back passages or flying off the supercharge ramps in Wizard Peak, or making a clever jump or two in Haunted Towers, or finally catching the red and yellow gem thieves in treetops. Though, that being said, as a youth, my dumbass thought that some of these areas were inaccessible by design until some undefined later point in the game where you'd come back with the power of indefinite flight, and I suppose in its own way, finding out that I was wrong about that and then having to find the right way on top of that led to a satisfaction of its own. I certainly don't hold it against the game anyway, it gave me that many more good memories with it. And it takes talent to make a level that's capable of that kind of emotional connection, especially in an early, cutesy mascot platformer. And that brings us on to the last main prong here. It's been said, and this is a philosophy pioneered by Futurama of all things, that if you do something right, people won't be sure that you've done anything at all. And when it comes to this game, that is absolutely true. It's so easy to overlook the multiple levels of variety it offers because of how well they're executed. And I do mean multiple layers. There's more than just the notion of there being variety in the game. There's also the question of how these assorted varieties interlink with each other and what balances are met between... You know what? I should just get on with explaining the specifics, because that will make this so much easier to understand where I'm coming from. Firstly, to reiterate, there are 6 main homeworlds in the game, including the endgame, and even if you distill them into one word, no two are similar in anything other than that they seem germane to the game's overall world. Grass, canyon, mountains, swamp, castle, machines. And even within single-word tropes, there's more than a healthy spread of variety there. Then, there are the levels within those worlds, each one feeling at home in their associated hub, without seeming like a clone of its counterparts. And, in each hub world, there are 3 main levels, plus a so-called flight level, and a boss level. Immediately, that tells you that there's variation in gameplay styles even in this game before the introduction of formal minigame missions. Yes, there are bosses, though not really in the traditional sense. They're not required for anything other than 100% or helping you towards progress. You're never forced into confronting them, and you're never locked into a single arena with them either. You can retreat as you will. Each boss is a level in its own right, and you need to find or chase the boss, which is really more of just a tough enemy that takes 3 attacks instead of the standard 1, and that's it. And your sole reward is gems. Yeah, there are dragons, or actually just 1 dragon singular, to collect in the level, but beating the boss itself only gets you gems. That ought to highlight how optional it is, and what sort of risk-reward mechanism is associated with you daring to switch up how you play the game in the first place. That's embodied even more effectively by the flight levels. They're not formally introduced until the 3rd hub world, but they're present and accessible from the second you start the game. It just so happens that the portals to the flight levels tend to be hidden, especially in the first 2 hubs, just because you're not technically supposed to know that they exist at that point. And again, the only reward is gems. Each one is a minigame where Spyro has infinite flight, and in fact, landing in the water below is counted as an instant fail. The objective is to fly through, or flame, 4 sets of 8 targets within a time limit. Until you beat the level for the first time, each target gives you 1 to 3 extra seconds on the clock depending on the target, and on subsequent plays, the clock counts up instead. Either way, it's 1 level in every 6, centered entirely around optimizing your route with an unfamiliar mechanic, and it's so not required that the only reward, once again, is gems. 60 for every complete set of targets that you get by the end of the time limit or by the time you crash, and an additional 60 for getting all 40 targets in one single run for a total of 300 gems. No dragons are at stake, and again, you have to choose to do this, and you're not penalized for staying away from it. But you get to experience a different side of the game if you do, and it's a side, again, that feels like it completely fits with everything else perfectly naturally. Now, don't get me wrong, in order to access the next hub world, you do need to fulfill several objectives. To reach the 2nd hub, you need to have freed 10 dragons. To reach the 3rd, you need 1,200 gems altogether. To reach the 4th, you need 5 dragon eggs, so they are required, despite how random they seem within the game. To reach the 5th, you need 50 dragons, and to reach the end game, you need a sum total of 6,000 gems across all the levels so far. So you do need a varied approach to the game in order to beat it properly. You need to embrace the variety that it offers, but the thresholds are very lenient. In fact, if you 100% complete the first 2 homeworlds, you can actually bypass the 3rd entirely without doing anything in it. Though you would pay the price for that later down the line, what with the later hub world's entry requirements. In short, the game has variety, and it knows how to gently nudge you towards appreciating it, all whilst making it feel completely like your choice at every given moment. And low-key, an afterthought, there's variety in the design as well, just in that each homeworld's native type of dragon has a different physical appearance to them, apart from in the endgame where you're re-rescuing dragons from assorted locations earlier in the game. And there's also the question of gems, which I've always been a massive fan of. In order to make up those nice round hundreds I was praising earlier, they work similarly to rupees in The Legend of Zelda, as in each colour is worth a different amount. Red is worth 1, green is 2, blue, which was later changed to deep purple, is 5, yellow is 10, and cherry pink is 25, although 25 gems are light blue in the GBA titles instead for some reason, and each one is a different shape too, but that's not really emphasised until the next game. Also, the gems always sparkle even when they're not loaded in, so draw distance is never an issue. You can always see an uncollected gem no matter how far away you are from it. Okay, footnote over. Okay, I gushed about this game for far longer than I ought to. I usually like to keep my reviews a bit more concise than this, and I do have a nasty feeling that this video might run over long, but I had so much to say to illustrate my point that Spyro 1, the raw Spyro experience, is fun. So it should come as little surprise that I give it a rank A. What were you expecting? For its time, it was a really solid contender in the console mascot game market. At that point, Sega had Sonic Adventure, Nintendo had Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, and Sony now had Crash Bandicoot and this. For its time, it was solid, fun, engaging, memorable, and well put together. And what seals the deal on that rank A is that it holds up. It holds up and then some. This game has aged so goddamn gracefully that yes, people are clamoring for an HD remaster so they can enjoy it on their modern consoles with enhanced visuals, and possibly with content restored to it that had to be cut from the original release due to time or budget or whatever. This game has aged so well that it formed the basis for the entire formula for the whole franchise that people can't get enough of to this very day. Just look at all the fan games and indie games being developed from these very humble beginnings. Dio, Nitro, Myths Awaken, Spring Savannah, just to name 4 off the top of my head. This game got so much right. It's not perfect by any means, but no game is. But the first Spyro game is close enough to perfection for what it is that doesn't matter. And once again, I urge you to just not think about the disaster that was the Japanese version. Moving swiftly on, all that remains is for me to thank you for watching, and to thank you even more if you happen to be supporting me on patreon.com/Tessehags. I say this every time, but if you support me on Patreon, which you can do for as little as $1 per video, that's entirely up to you, you can get access to these videos 1 whole month before anyone else, so all my memes and references and jokes are still fresh and spicy. And you get other perks besides, and my undying thanks on top of that too, and that's all you could ever really want from me, right? Right? Well, in any case, I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons. If you want more of me, join the Patreon campaign to get immediate access to 2 more videos just like this one, and until my next video, I shall bid you a fond farewell.